From the world's most mysterious stories to questions nobody else dares ask, this is the place where fact meets possibility, where logic meets the unexplained, and where we search for the truth that never sleeps. Welcome to the X Zone, everyone, broadcasting across Canada and the United States and around the world right here from our studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell, and this is the X Zone, and we're coming to you on the CanCom Broadcast Network. Tonight we open another door into the unknown, another conversation that challenges what we think we know, and another journey into stories shaping our world, seen and unseen. Because here in the X Zone, we don't tell you what to believe, we invite you to decide for yourself.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back, everyone. Great having you with us tonight here in the X Zone. And tonight here we are welcoming an award-winning investigative journalist whose work has appeared in major publications, including Newsweek, The Atlantic, and many others. But we're going to be talking to our guest this hour about a fascinating article that was published, and he has many articles published in the Washington Spectator, and the website is washingtonspectator.org. My guest Exonation is Art Levine. He is a veteran reporter, author, and contributing editor known for his deeply researched investigations into political, social issues, public policy, and the forces shaping the modern society that we all live in. In his latest hard-hitting analysis, Art examines the troubling rise of antisemitism in the United States, exploring how extreme rhetoric, political divisions, conspiracy movements, and ideological conflicts are influencing public discourse and reshaping the national landscape. His reporting traces internal political struggles, media influences, the generational shifts, and of course generational shifts are, they're fueling tensions right across the country and raising serious questions about the future of democratic institutions and civil society. It's my great pleasure to bring Art Levine on the show. And Art, welcome back to the X Zone. Great seeing you, my friend. How are things with you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on, and I look forward to speaking to you and your audience about these very important issues.
Art, your article that you were kind enough to send me, that I believe does appear in the Washington Spectator. Their website is washingtonspectator.org. What first led you to investigate the rise of anti-Semitism within the modern American political movements?
Well, part of it was it was just becoming a little more evident in terms of a kind of tolerance for anti-Semitic rhetoric and ideas that were implicitly anti-Semitic, like Tucker Carlson's promotion, first when he was on Fox and later of something known as the Great Replacement Theory. But the other driving motive, and this included the suggestion of my editor, Hamilton Fish, at the Washington Spectator, is the Trump administration was claiming, to crack down on universities, that there was massive protests against, the war on Gaza by Israel, and they were essentially labeling all of it or most of it as anti-Semitic, as opposed to being legitimate criticism of Israel and its conduct of the war. And increasingly, the war has been viewed by some scholars as, genocidal, experts on genocide. But whatever, there's a lot of controversy and turning away against Israel. Now, what happened as a result? But that's what's happened. But the hypocrisy of the administration going after 60 universities. They first went over in the most high-profile way, Columbia and then Harvard, really Ivy League schools. But there's 60 total schools, most of which they're alleging are too tolerant of anti-Semitism, and that was kind of like the foot in the door to then control who they hire and what they teach. But the rank hypocrisy of it was nutty. The fact that they had people, including the FBI director, Kash Patel, who before he became the FBI director, was a podcaster and attorney who appeared on a Holocaust deniers podcast named Stu Peters 7 times.
Wow.
So, and then they had people scattered throughout the administration who were primarily very sympathetic to neo-Nazis. There's so many, too many to count. And some of them it became more evident when they were being nominated for higher posts. So, for instance, there's a guy named Ed Martin, who was an acting U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia. Well, he had been a champion of a guy named Hale Cuccinelli, is his last name, who was, wore, Auschwitz, clothing, was an open anti-Semite, was part of January 6th. And he, in fact, called him a great guy, gave him an award at Trump's golf club, Bedminster in New Jersey, and stood up for him and praised him. Now, this is the kind of, they were shot through the administration. And then there was if you count the different articles that I've done, that extremism monitoring groups have done, such as Southern Poverty Law Center, such as Political Research Associates, such as the New Republic, a liberal left-wing magazine called Jacobin. There's maybe about 20 officials, current and recent, who scattered through have sympathies to various anti-Semites. Then on top of that, the hypocrisy also is they're extremely moving into a Christian nationalist type of government. Now, Christian nationalism right now does not overtly say all Christians count and everybody else will be a second-class citizen, but that is sort of at the heart of its theology, that, America was founded as a Christian country and we should follow Christian norms and rules. And Trump's advisor is this, they have these extremist advisors who, spout these very extreme views. And all of this is shot through in terms of the administration. And then on top of that, there was the rise of people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. And so originally it's a long answer, but basically originally look at the hypocrisy of the Trump administration. Then in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, there was an increasing rift, and that occurred in September. There's an increasing rift in MAGA, the Make America Great, a movement that basically ended up, leading to more extreme voices flooding the zone here. And so it's pretty complicated, but it's where we are now. And now essentially the top political figures in the Republican Party and the top most influential media figures on the right wing broadcast and even more powerful social media online, like Candace Owens, are welcoming with no bars. That includes Candace Owens and J.D. Vance, the vice president, are welcoming with open arms people with anti-Semitic views and are not challenging people like Candace Owens, who is a virulent anti-Semite and was kicked out of 2 separate right-wing groups for being too anti-Semitic for them.
Now, what is the difference between the right and the left when it comes to American politics?
Oh, well, basically, that's a big debate, because basically we have 2 political parties, and traditionally the Democrats have been more liberal on social issues and, more pro safety net and somewhat more critical on wars. And then we have the right, then the Republican Party, I think most people would now agree, has been turned into a sort of a personality cult around Trump, and he's engaging in obviously authoritarian type tactics, blowing past constitutional norms. The Democrats aren't doing that, but then they have their own. They're not exactly of the left now. So an example of that is they had a populist left Democratic socialist run for mayor and get elected, very charismatic young fellow Mamdani, right? But the Democratic establishment, was against him and refused to endorse him. And then millions of dollars flowed into their different opponents. And so there's tensions now between the left of the Democratic Party and the mainstream, because they feel that the mainstream leaders, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, the Minority Leader in the House, have not been aggressive in using what little power they have, such as in debates over the budget, to push back against the extreme authoritarianism. But they're still, even in the wake of this, the unjustified shootings in cold blood in daylight on film in Minnesota, Renee Good and Mr. Preddy, Alex Preddy, that there's not really a full-scale pushback against what's happening. And I happen to know a lot and can give your audience plenty of resources to learn more about the authoritarianism. So we have one party that is, even though it's centrist and not really left as would be understood in Canada or Europe, it's sort of a liberal, moderate, centrist party leadership, and then a kind of rebellious left wing of that Democratic Party. And a lot of it is around Israel, because the left wing of the Democratic Party is, really outraged over continuing military support to Israel over the war in Gaza.
And it's going to get a little worse, I believe, with the second aircraft carrier group that has been deployed to that part of the world. I know that President Trump is talking about it, using it as a force play when it comes to Iran and the peace talks.
Right.
But when you look at the geography of the world, based where these aircraft battle groups are going to be placed, they could hit anywhere, including the Soviet Union, including Gaza. The door is wide open when you have the.
I think it's more like, if it is used, because we did back up the bomb. There was this spree of bombing of Iran directly by Israel, and we backed it up with some of our own strikes or support of those strikes, and so I think the battleships are there, where he's looking for some justification. And you should know that attacking Iran directly has been a fever dream wish of hawkish pro-military types in the Republican Party for like decades.
All right, we've got to take our break here, so please stand by. X-Zone Nation, my very special guest this hour is Art Levine. And you can read Art's fascinating article at washingtonspectator.org. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone, and we'll be back on the other side of these breaks. So whatever you do, don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Art Levine is our special guest, and we're talking about anti-Semitism in the United States right now. And Art, based on everything that you've uncovered, is the real problem the extremists themselves or mainstream leaders who tolerate them because they want their support and their money?
Here's the thing. We've had fringe neo-Nazi movements, and we've had fringe anti-Semitism movements, and the Republican Party has made a show in earlier decades, certainly during the Goldwater days of the 60s, of like booting out officially the around 1964, the Goldwater race, booting out the John Birch Society, which was overtly anti-Semitic and super paranoid, but they welcomed the support. They booted out the leaders, and David Korn of Mother Jones has a great book called American Psychosis, where he looked at the decades of kind of tacitly cooperating with extremists, and he calls it playing footsie with neo-Nazis. So that has been the default position of the Republican Party for decades. What's happened is that increasingly influential people, such as Candace Owens, who's very important for people who are not really following her to know how important she is, based on downloads and per views of all her platforms in YouTube. She has over 6 million YouTube views, but all over, if you look at all of her downloads and per episode views, she is among the most popular podcasters in the world. And for a while, she was the number one podcaster, even beating Joe Rogan. And she has been helped pushing in to the mainstream incredible, medieval and modern anti-Semitic tropes. And so she's dangerous. And then what's happened is, then you have a fellow like Nick, and so she's very popular, and she has not been attacked except by like one prominent person, and that's Ben Shapiro, who has with the Daily Wire, who happens to be Jewish, and he's been the only most visible person pushing back. Everybody else has either laid hands off of Candace. Then secondly, where everything exploded into the wide view is when Tucker Carlson gave a very sympathetic interview to a person who had just been kicked out of the conservative meeting groups just 2 years ago, Nick Fuentes, whose followers, are nicknamed Groypers, back on having to do with some frog meme. But they are extremists who were very hostile to Charlie Kirk as being too moderate, even though Charlie Kirk himself, engaged in racist and dialogues and so on. But Fuentes is an overt neo-Nazi lover. So he was just platformed in December. So but what's happened is he has said things like Hitler is effing cool. And, he's analogized the Holocaust and doubting and saying, you couldn't bake 6 million cookies. So how could you kill 6 million Jews? Really, you got to understand but he is popular, and he's been treated with kid gloves, including by the Vice President of the United States, named J.D. Vance, who went. So the explosion occurred in October when Tucker Carlson hosted for a sympathetic interview Nick Fuentes. Earlier, he had a straight-up Holocaust denier who said, "Oh, it was Churchill's fault that we got it. Well, Hitler didn't start World War II. Whoever died in the quote Holocaust, as he views it, was just an accident." I mean, these incredible. So I call Carlson's show a PR agency for Holocaust deniers. Okay, right. That is his show, and so basically he is very influential, and he's given them a platform. So then on top of that, in October he made an appearance on Carlson's show, and just to remind people, beside saying Hitler was effing cool, I'm talking about Fuentes, has decried Holocaust education as propaganda. And he says, the only real genocide going on in the world today is of white people, and it's being subverted. Our country's being subverted by Jews. Okay, this is literally words coming out of his mouth. So he's given this massive platform for a person who had been once the most visible, highest rated Fox News guy. And then he had to be forced out, I guess, because leaks about him knowing that, in fact, there was no voter fraud in 2020. In any case, he gives him so this creates a big rupture. And where it really blew apart, and I cover all this, is in November, the right-wing Heritage Foundation, which had laid the groundwork for this authoritarian, very well-planned Project 2025 to kind of have a centralized power. And they laid the groundwork for how to go after the left-wing anti-Gaza war protesters. The president of the United States not of the United States of Heritage said he defended Tucker Carlson, defended advertising him, defended giving him money, and then said that the only people criticizing him, the president of Heritage and Tucker, were members of the globalist class. Now, the word globalist has been known for about 20 years to be, code for Jews. Globalist, and that's part of the Great Replacement theory notion that, immigrants led by Jewish money lenders and influencers will sweep over our country. Then a number of people quit. Lots of people quit, including, and I covered this event, members of the Heritage Zone Anti-Semitism Task Force.
Right.
And I go cover it. But the upshot is with the Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance, and to a large degree, except for occasional lip service being concerned about, Donald Trump declined to criticize Fuentes or Carlson by name. And he just like on February 11, just a few weeks ago, he gave a lip service interview to the New York Times where he said, well, I don't think we really need anti-Semites in our party. We don't like them. That was it. Everything else, including his own meeting with Fuentes and notorious anti-Semite Kanye West, who had a video out called Heil Hitler. He invited him to their home for Thanksgiving. And he's repeatedly invoked Jewish greed, tropes that Jews aren't really loyal to America, but are primarily loyal to Israel. So this is our president, who I have called, it wasn't published in the latest version, anti-Semite in chief is Donald Trump. That's what we have right now. So naturally, as the anti-Semite in chief, he doesn't really care or really is much alarmed by the plethora of anti-Semites outside of the administration and inside the administration who are kind of, trading favors, influence, and access.
Mm-hmm. How does that make you feel?
Well, it makes me kind of worried. And, and I do think growing up, I'm religious in that I believe in God and I'm Jewish, but I'm essentially secular. And I grew up, I faced some personal anti-Semitism, like, in grade school, whatever. But personally, I have chronicled extremism, but I haven't personally encountered much in the way of anti-Semitism personally. But what's changed is now, in the wake of the massive unpopularity of Israel and the free open door policy of the Republican Party to extreme anti-Semites, hate crimes and attacks on Jews, in general has risen, even if we may doubt some of the, 2025 FBI stats. There's good polling to indicate like a third of Jewish college students right now are fearful of wearing any symbols on them that indicate they're Jewish, meaning, a Jewish star or a yarmulke for skullcap for Orthodox Jews. And I think it is, it's very complicated in that there have been, and there's a great, before October 7th, there has been a problem about the left who are anti-Israel accepting Jews who are supportive of Israel, but generally supportive of their progressive aims into their movement. But it's pretty complicated. But the danger, when you look at the whole scope of anti-Semitic violence, while some of it has been by Muslim extremists, plenty of it has been by people inspired by the Great Replacement theory. So in New Zealand, the Christchurch thing in New Zealand, and the Tree of Life Synagogue, and the slaughters in the church in South Carolina were inspired in their manifestos they wrote by the Great Replacement theory, which is essentially, our our wonderful white race is being compromised by all these immigrants who are taking our jobs and voting fraudulently, engineered by the puppet masters who are the Jewish globalists, in particular George Soros. And it turns out that the anti-Semitism task force of Heritage actually referred to George Soros because they were right wing, only looking originally at left wing, pseudo anti-Semitism or Gaza. They called George Soros a mastermind, which is an anti-Semitic trope. Okay, and so to bring it up to date, we now have under sort of the architect Stephen Miller, who's Stephen Miller is every kids in cages, the entire crackdown, arrest everybody. That guy is the architect. He's Jewish, of the Trump administration's own anti-Semitism task force. And I saw in person this guy named Leo Terrell, who's a former Democrat, an African American, a Christian nationalist, sort of denouncing all the enablers of the anti-Israel groups, at this conference run by the Heritage people who had the former anti-Semitism task force. But this guy himself has retweeted, while he was in the anti-Semitism task force, a neo-Nazi tweet thread from a neo-Nazi praising Donald Trump for criticizing Chuck Schumer as being, quote, a Palestinian and not a Jew anymore, but being a Palestinian, according to Donald Trump, because he was made mild noises somewhat critical of Israel. And so this neo-Nazi boasted on Twitter, well, it looks like Trump has revoked Chuck Schumer's Jew card. And what did our wonderful anti-Semitism monitor, paid for by your tax dollars, do in the Justice Department? Retweeted it. So what kind of crazy stuff's going on when the federal government's anti-Semitism task force is retweeting Nazis? I mean, that's how crazy things are.
You and I have to take our break at the bottom of the hour, Art. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's always a great pleasure talking to you. Now, let our listeners know what the name of your article is and how they can read it online.
Yes, it's called, you just go to WashingtonSpectator.org, and the article's called Inside the MAGA Meltdown Over Anti-Semitism.
It's a great article. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and you did one hell of a job doing it, my friend. Exo Nation, I'll be back on the other side of the short break with our guest this hour and the next hour as well, Art Levine, www.washingtonspectator.org. This is the Exo, and I'm Rob McConnell, and you're listening to us and watching us on the CanCom Broadcast Network. Don't go away.
Ghosts that wander and sway, stories untold, a creature of legend from the tales of yore, known as Bigfoot, but he's so much more. Oh, Bigfoot, wanderer of the night.
Welcome back, everyone. Our guest this hour is Art Levine. His website, where you can read his article, is at WashingtonSpectator.org. Art, have we already passed the point where extremist rhetoric can be pushed back to the fringe, or is there still a realistic path to reversing this trend?
That's a really good question. My view is that it's extremely difficult unless the issue is there's always been extremists, there's a great, he's now passed away, James Ridgway, who did a great documentary film and a lot of investigative reporting with a film called Blood in the Face about there's been extremists forever. There's been the Klan, there's been neo-Nazi groups. What has changed dramatically and why it's so difficult is we have the power of these algorithmic bubbles that are monetizing hate and rage. And I'll just give an example from the leaks from that Facebook whistleblower. So they did an experiment where they created inside Facebook, they created just a generic Republican woman who liked Trump. and they created a program where she would just like anything that was right wing and supportive of Trump. Within 3 days, she was clicking on and being invited into neo-Nazi and anti-Semitic Facebook pages and seeing ads along extremist lines. So it's this interiorization of hate that goes beyond, handing out anti-Semitic leaflets in the neighborhood. So then we have, my feeling is that the welcome mat for extremism, mostly coming from the Republicans at this point, won't happen until there's severe enough electoral beating that they realize that this isn't a good look for them and they need to roll back. But I've also done a lot of reporting on vote suppression since 2006 for Salon. I cannot, I am very alarmed by all the actions the administration has taken. And this may seem far afield from your question, but it's not, is unless there's free and fair elections and there isn't going to be ICE allowed under the Supreme Court to detain dark-skinned people with accents on voting lines or seize voting machines and ballots like they did in Georgia, or declare an insurrection act or claim there's violent insurrection and send troops. You don't need that many to create a fear effect. You just need, you pick a few key swing districts and you dispatch military on the grounds of insurrection or violence or crime, which Trump has shown himself willing to do. And early in the day, it'll be who wants to show up when there's masked agents with guns outside polling places. And at this moment, while the Democrats are negotiating about trying to reform as opposed to abolish ICE, this issue of preventing military from or federal agents from going to voting booths, as far as I know, is not on the table right now. But the Democratic leaders are not pushing for that while there's currently a government shutdown for much of DHS. It's very convoluted. So I think it could be, if billions and billions of dollars are made by social media creating information bubbles for both the left, right, center, and personal interests that feed on outrage and hate, that's very hard to mention. And this may sound very extreme, and I'm not comparing in any way Trump to Hitler or the death camps, but look what Hitler was able to do with just newspapers and radio compared to what's getting into the mind of people increasingly online. See, it's a long shot. I think it could happen, but it won't happen until the Republican Party is somehow forced to disavow it and realize it's bad for their elections. But under the American two-party system and gerrymandering and vote suppression and the Electoral College, it's very hard to implement reforms like you would see in Canada with a multi-party system.
What about the Constitution? Doesn't the Constitution protect against anti-Semitism because of freedom of religion? How can all this be taking place in a democratic society?
Well, no, the First Amendment, I'll give an example. First Amendment is, when it's done, implemented correctly, allows free speech, including hate speech.
Really?
Yes. And so, for instance, so basically, under freedom of religion, you can't have a favoritism towards one religion or another or any religion, but you can't ban anti-Semitic speech or actions unless it becomes criminality. And years ago, the Supreme Court had a wonderful decision of where free speech is. You have wide-ranging free speech, but you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. So it's when anti-Semitic speech is directly incentivizing murder and violence that you can. But the term that's grown up by people who studied the impact is the term is worth looking up, called stochastic terrorism, where, like, Tucker Carlson had over 400 episodes when he was on Fox, the leading cable network in America, and then replayed on social media about the Great Replacement Theory. Endless amounts referring to globalists and George Soros bringing in migrants, taking our jobs, promoting crime, raping, highlighting white women who were being raped by, someone who was an immigrant. They did 400 times. So when somebody receives this directly from Fox or indirectly, and they are mentally ill or in their own hate bubbles go out and slaughter people at worship, well, Tucker Carlson's not responsible personally for that. He's not. You can't make a criminal case against him. Uh, but it's stochastic terrorism, and that's what people worry about with Trump, with his demonizing language against his enemies. And he actually, though, did put it in writing. And a guy named Ken Klipperstein, well worth reading, is National Security, NSPM. It's a National Security Memo, number 7, where speech such as being critical of immigration policies, being critical of traditional Christianity, or engaging in woke views on race, are signposts that you could be a domestic terrorist, okay, and have violent intent. So when everybody was shocked after the shooting of Renee Good and the shooting of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis, where the administration came out immediately and called them domestic terrorists. But they said, but here's the thing is, this is very technical, but they said they're engaged in domestic terrorism. And under the guidelines of Trump's executive order and their biased views, any criticism of ICE is a sign that you are likely engaged in domestic terrorism. I mean, that's how crazy it is. So they undoubtedly, they wouldn't have, under the Trump administration, they were given fairly free leeway to do that. Now, later, when it became obvious from all the video, particularly the Alex Preddy video, when there's 10 shots to the prone body, they ended up saying, they basically try to point the blame. Kristi Noem said, well, I said that because I was told this by Stephen Miller. And then Miller and the White House. And then Miller said, no, I got this. This was what I was told by the Customs and Border Patrol. Because those were the agents who actually ended up shooting Preddy. And people have done research earlier, because there's video of him banging in anger, the rear light of a car. They may have been targeting him because they knew who he was.
So
10 shots.
It seems to me up here in Canada, first of all, we have a hate law up here.
Right.
And it's well enforced, and I think it's a great thing. But looking at what is going on in the United States, it seems that your own president doesn't give two hoots about the Constitution and is constantly violating it, and nobody's pushing back.
Yeah, the only pushback, but that's being evaded. So basically, I think there was an article recently that said in 1,400 different court examples about detaining of illegal immigrants, they were violating court orders about allowing the person to have an attorney or use the, ancient principle from England of, habeas corpus, allowing the person to show up in court to defend themselves. So they're violating the Constitution this is the thing, is they're doing it in deed, not in word. So they never directly go into court and say, hi, judge, F you, we're not going to obey your court order, screw you. It's an unitary executive authority. But they basically do everything but, and they willfully ignore court orders right and left. So what worries me is if, in terms of 2026 and 2028 elections, there's going to be well-meaning Democratic governors and attorney generals who are going to go to court and say, on the day, either before or on the day of, you shouldn't have armed officials outside of polling booths, and you shouldn't be detaining people of dark skin with accents as potential illegal immigrants while they're in line to vote. Okay. Right. Now, they're going to go to court, and they're going to be, it could easily be ignored, or they'll find some way to appeal it. or they'll put it on, the Supreme Court has essentially been extremely pro-Trump and allowed it, and allowed this wide-ranging unconstitutional. So we're well past the time, and there's constitutional experts on authoritarianism, Jason Stanley, Timothy Snyder, Bryn Tannehill, they've all fled to Canada. The leading scholars and experts on authoritarianism are now living in Canada because of the fear of what could happen, because they've covered it historically. So, ACLU's envelopes right now for their label, the ACLU to fight it for constitutional rights, their front of their envelope is, we're the ACLU, and we're not moving to Canada. But, but you read The Handmaid's Tale about Canada and what role Handmaid's Tale is about to come true. And Canada may be the place where people end up fleeing.
Art, you and I have to take our final break for this hour. In Exonation, Art Levine is our special guest. He's a contributor to the Washington Spectator. He's got a great article there at www.washingtonspectator.org. When we come back, more about anti-Semitism, and then in the new hour, we may break away from anti-Semitism to talk about, let me see here. How about the Trump-Epstein files?
Okay.
Well, I figure he put his name in front of the Kennedy Center. We may as well put his name in front of the Epstein files. So we'll be back on the other side of this break, so whatever you do, don't go away. This is The X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you on the CanCom Broadcast Network. Don't go away.
In the twilight glow where the shadows creep, in the quiet woods where secrets sleep, there's a tale that's told by the firelight's dance of a great wild spirit and a second chance. They say he's a giant with a heart so bold. Living tapestry, our pride is bold. With the wheat fields waving under skies so wide, we carry within us.
And welcome back, everyone. Our guest this hour is the one and only Art Levine. He's got a great article at washingtonspectator.org. There's a lot going on in the world today, Art. It seems that no matter what day it is, there's always something in the mainstream media pertaining to President Trump and what he's doing, what he's not doing, whether he's going to, try and rip off Denmark for Greenland, or whether he's calling our prime minister governor and he's going to try and annex Canada, which will never happen. But the anti-Semitism, it seems that the United States is trying to, or I should say the administration is trying to put themselves where Hitler was prior to World War II.
Yeah, a lot of people reel up anytime you make a Hitler comparison. Yes, Hitler's unique, and the Shoah and the genocide of Jews is unique in history. However, scholars point out to a template of fascism and what might be reasonably called neo-fascism. Yes, because basically we're creeping along in terms of encouraging and allowing political violence, and I think the framework to understand Minneapolis and what's happening there is political violence, because there's a higher degrees of illegal immigrants in Texas cities, and Minneapolis has not much in the way of a crime rate, and yet they're flooding it into democratic cities. So they were in LA, they had the National Guard. Here in Chicago, they were going after what they claimed was a gang, and they had, like helicopters and people rappelling down, like, they were invading in Iraq into apartment complexes, and nobody there was either a member of the gang or even had anything remotely approaching a violent criminal record. They were like putting kids in freezing weather out in the street. I mean, so it's to soften up And it's sort of like, that's the whole point. They use the boiling frog analogy, is like things that would not have been acceptable just 2 years ago, like taking an American citizen, aged Hamong, if you pronounce it correctly, Asian American grandfather, and pushing him out in the snow with just his robe and slippers into the snow. And then they said, well, it was a mistake. We thought this was the address of a child predator. Then it turns out that child predator was in custody by the state. He was in prison already. And then and this information was known, or should have been known, by them. And so what I'm getting at is the boiling frog gets slow and slow and slow, and we get sort of accepting it. So, the degree of interference of just yesterday, okay, Stephen Colbert, this may sound a little off, but it's related to authoritarianism. The FCC threatened CBS, you can't allow Stephen Colbert to air a segment with actually a pro-Christian legislator in Texas because he's running for office. And they established some new fairness rule, like in December, that would bar talk shows from allowing anybody who's a political leader to speak, because you must have the fairness rule. Well, the entire growth of Fox News was enabled by the ending the fairness rule, which used to be, if you have one political point of view, you are required, particularly in election season or a run-up, to have an opposing point of view. I know that appears minor compared to violence on the streets and killing American citizens in cold blood.
But it's all part.
What?
It's all part and parcel of what's
It's part and parcel. And then the other thing that's going on, which I talk about in my article, is the signaling. After Renee Good was killed, they were running ads modeled after Hitler Nazi slogans, but not directly. So literally 3 days after Renee Good is killed, DHS is the Labor Department, but in sympathy to the Department of, it's part of a general pro-recruitment, pro-militarization, use the slogan, one homeland, one people, one heritage, as if the United States is not a melting pot of ethnicities. And this has basically been reasonably viewed as analogous to Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer. But secondly, this is kind of amazing. 2 days after Renee Good, 2 days after Renee Good is shot, DHS has an explicit recruiting poster and video for ICE agents. And what are they playing? An anthem that I linked to, you have to hear it, favored and promoted by the Proud Boys, called We'll Have Our Home Again. Okay? Now, do you imagine? Her corpse is barely cold, and they're running We'll Have Our Home Again by the neo-Nazi, Holocaust-denying Proud Boys who are leaders of the insurrection. And they're highlighting an anthem that they're championing. And when you hear the anthem, it's got pounding martial drums. It's just unbelievable.
I found out that a number of these ICE agents were actually insurrectionists who were charged, thrown in jail, and because they were exonerated by Trump, they were able to get jobs with ICE. I think the $50,000 sign-on bonus.
Right. And right now in the American economy, the largest upswing in hiring of any business or organization is the 50,000, is ICE with its thing. And they keep lowering the physical fitness standards. They lower the educational standards. I think you might still have to have a high school degree, but given the sloppiness of vetting that goes on there, as shown by the Epstein files, where many of the victims' names were left unredacted, but all the abusers' names and even the co-conspirators were covered up. So they're not really caring. They don't do any serious vetting. And a writer, I think, for Slate, a woman who was a military veteran went undercover and did have, I think something in her record about using marijuana, but not, but they didn't even look at her criminal record or anything about her. And she went undercover, reported of it. And they're still they're not vetting, and they're actively recruiting at gun shows, and they're using all this neo-Nazi and white supremacist talking points and messaging, including echoing a literal Holocaust denial neo-Nazi book called "Which Way, White Man?" And they're using echoes of that phrase, before Trump went to negotiate, threaten Greenland, was "Which way, Greenland man?" And they've been using so the dog whistles are no longer dog whistles, they're bullhorns. And that's what's frightening. But
it is. And when we come back on the other side of the news break at the top of the hour, I'd love to get into the Epstein files, because what is it? Let me see. They were supposed to have all the files.
I'll be glad to talk about it. And I want to add, there's an Epstein-style scandal happening in the mental health juvenile teen treatment facilities as well. That is worth mentioning and people learning about.
All right, well, we certainly do have enough to talk about, but we've got about 6 minutes left in this segment, in this hour. And when it comes to the events that are happening in Minnesota, do you think that Tom Homan should have been there in the first place?
Well, he was sent in. The notion that this is a guy who's pro separating kids and putting them in cages, and was very supportive of tough crackdowns. He's the voice of moderation, I guess, compared to Bonvino, who literally was cosplaying, Nazi-style outfits and being very hardline and throwing gas canisters himself in the face of protests. So he's pretending to be more moderate. And when Tom Homan is your moderate, and let alone in any other administration, he's on tape taking a apparent $50,000 bribe, and in a restaurant bag, and the FBI
sting,
and they found about it accidentally in a sting, and he took the bribe, and it's on film, and of course there's no prosecution. All this stuff is totally unthinkable. It's sort of the frog boiling. Yeah. Like, when will we have someone for putting kids in cages and taking $50,000 bribes and never saying whether he gave the money back or what he did with the $50,000, and you drop the criminal investigation? It's just nutty. And they're doing more extreme stuff. And the next thing they were planning, and they were only temporary stop, is to do ethnic cleansing of every Haitian in Springfield. Get rid of 35,000 Haitians by removing the protective status they had when they left because of earthquakes and political repression, because of literally neo-Nazis creating the myth of Haitians eating dogs and cats in Springfield, echoed and promoted by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. That mythology is now the basis of proposed ethnic cleansing, of getting rid of every Haitian who lives in who might be under protected status but here legally, and get rid of them. And it's called ethnic cleansing by an expert on authoritarianism, Timothy Snyder.
How can the existing government, the Congress, let him get away with all this? What power does he have over Congress? Why don't they just say enough is enough?
Well, it's basically been the cult of Trump since 2016, or they would have impeached him. He had, very few Republicans voted to impeach him on either the Zelensky, interference or the insurrection, where they themselves were threatened, because he can primary them. He's the most influential figure in their lives. So he could, but also Mitt Romney reported in his autobiography, said, boy, you had a lot of courage voting for impeachment, Senator Romney, but I'm scared me and my family would be killed if I voted for impeachment. So they're scared of being killed by the most extreme Republican members, and they have good reason if during the insurrection they were basically, he was inciting the mob to say, I'm very disappointed by Mike Pence. And he said nothing while they were, having a rope for hanging him and shouting, kill Mike Pence, kill Mike Pence. And he did nothing. So he's perfectly fine if his stochastic terrorism encourages extreme MAGA people to threaten, assault, or harass sitting members of Congress, House, or Senate who oppose him in any way. So whenever he says, well, you're going to be finished in politics, it could be read most benignly as a primary threat, but it's a lot more underlying it.
Interesting conversation with my very special guest and friend, the one and only Art Levine. His article can be read at washingtonspectator.org, and we're going to put all the links to his articles at www.xzbn.net. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone, and you're listening to us on CanCom Broadcast Network. Don't go away.
Oh, proud to be Canadian. Let the anthem resound. A place full of promise. Our hearts are